Okay. Tonight we are finishing reading Frankie Fish and the Sonic Suitcase up to chapter 25. Dust, wood shavings, and pollen. Those were the things Frankie could smell when he woke in his granddad's shed. Frankie turned to see Grandad, who was sitting up and rubbing his eyes. They looked at each other wordlessly, and then got up and headed out of the shed. Straight away, Frankie noticed that Nana Fish's forget-me-nots and rose bushes were back where they should be. That was a good sign. But Frankie knew it didn't definitely mean that Nana was back. Maybe his granddad had ended up marrying someone else who also happened to like flowers. There was only one way to know for sure. Heart pounding, Frankie walked with his granddad up to the back door of the fish house. Granddad put his hand on the doorknob and paused. "Whatever happens, Frankie, may I say I have enjoyed spending time with you," he said quietly, "even if we did risk the future of human civilization." "Me too," Frankie said with a small, nervous smile. They both took a big breath as Grandad opened the back door. Blueberry pancakes and freshly shampooed carpets. That was what Frankie could smell as he stepped inside. A smile crept across his face as he and Grandad walked into the kitchen, where they met with the best sight either of them had ever seen in their entire lives. Nana Fish, nay, Nurse Mavis Hopley, standing at the kitchen sink, dunking a tea bag into a cup of hot water. "Honey, you're home!" exclaimed Grandad. Nana Fish turned and with a puzzled smile said, "Of course I am, you old fool. Where else would I be?" Grandad gave her a big toothy grin followed by a big smooch right on the lips. Frankie was so relieved he didn't even gag. He raced through the house, checking that the bed in his grandparents' room was actually a double bed, that there were flowers in vases in every room and no dirt on the floor. Even the brown drapes had gone back to Nana's pretty polka-dotted curtains. He stood in the lounge looking around as Family Feud played on the TV. "Name something that cannot be changed," the host was saying. What cannot be changed? Unaware of how ironic that question was in this particular house. Everything was exactly the same. Frankie realised, relief rushing through him. Then in the living room he saw one thing that was different. On the wall above the couch the painting of dogs playing poker was gone. A new painting hung in its place. It was a portrait of a young Alfie Fish, moments before the big race. Alfie was depicted leaning against his number 42 racing car, talking to an old man and a boy. "Well, I'll be damned," said Alfie in amazement, wandering into the room with his arm around Nana Fish's shoulder. "It's a wonderful painting, isn't it?" said Nana. "I still get goosebumps when I look at it. I've often wondered who that man and young boy are, but I guess we'll never know." Frankie and Grandad exchanged a grin. "Who painted it, Nana?" asked Frankie. "Why, your great-uncle Roddy, of course," said Nana. "He always says that the day of the big race was when he decided to become a professional artist." She glanced at the clock. "Speaking of Roddy, he should be here in an hour or so." "Roddy's coming here?" asked Grandad, jaw dropping wide. "Of course, you silly fool. You know he always comes here when he's visiting from Paris," said Nana, swatting him fondly. "And I dare say the two of you will sit around all day talking about the old days in Glasgow, like you usually do." Frankie suddenly felt very warm, and the final little knot of tension in his belly melted away. The doorbell rang. "Roddy's plane must have landed early," Nana exclaimed as she bustled off to answer it. Frankie was feeling so good that at first he hadn't even noticed who'd entered the living room. Who was it? It was only when he felt a hand ruffling his hair that he looked around to see his mum beaming at him. Behind her was Frankie's dad and St. Lou, looking thrilled to see him. "Francis, mate," said his dad, "you've grown." Grandad smiled and Frankie felt his grin grow wider and wider. He gave his mum, his dad and even St. Lou, yes, that's how happy he was to be back, the biggest hugs of their lives. Tina Fish took her son's face in her hands and examined every inch of it. Her smile dipped just a little. "Your face," she remarked. Frankie felt the knot quickly reappear. "What about my face?" he asked, voice quivering slightly. "You look older somehow," she said. Then she smiled and gave her son a big squeeze. "Maybe a little more responsible too." "Well, I guess we can all change eventually, given enough time," Frankie said with a wink at his granddad, and Granddad winked back. Please don't do that, mate. Please don't do that. Chapter 26. An offer not even Drew Bird could resist. A week and a half later, Frankie did something he'd never thought possible. He turned up to school a whole 10 minutes early because he was desperate to see his best mate, Drew Bird. He ran across the courtyard through the quadrangle where some pre-season games of downball were in motion, past the Hedgehog and Miss Merriweather, who were walking hand in hand, down to the basketball courts and onto the oval where the Mosley triplets were already in trouble for throwing dirt at a bird's nest. Professional teacher's pet Lisa Chadwick and her ponytail flounced by, because, of course, Lisa Chadwick had to be early on the first day of school. "Hey, Lisa," Frankie called, "have you seen Drew Bird?" "Fish guts, do I look like I've seen Drew Bird?" she shot back before walking off briskly like she was on her way to have tea with the Queen. Frankie rolled his eyes, but then felt a creeping tension all over his body. His parents had stuck to the punishment of not allowing Frankie to see or even speak to Drew during the holidays. For all he knew, the Bird family had moved away. He might never see his best mate again. But then, "Frankie Fish!" a voice bellowed out from the adventure playground. Frankie turned to see a beaming Drew Bird on the swings. "Frankie Fish! Frankie Fish!" In a nanosecond, Frankie was at the swings as Drew Bird executed an impressive dismount. "So apparently we're not allowed to hang out," said Drew Bird with a big grin. "Apparently you're a bad influence, Frankie Fish." Frankie grinned back and said, "So are you, Drew Bird. But don't worry, I think I've found a way for us to hang out in secret. What do you like with history?" The end. For now.